On tosiaan ilo ja kunnia olla täällä esiintymässä ja vielä puhumassa lempiaiheestani verkkosäännöistä. Minun mielestäni säännöt ei ole ollenkaan tylsiä, mutta ymmärrän kyllä, jos ei kaikki haluaisi vapaa-aikana lukea eurooppalaisia lakitekstejä, että kyllähän ne pikkusen semmoisia puisia saattaa joidenkin mielestä olla. Ajattelin lyhyesti kertoa 4 asiasta. Lyhyt alustus siihen, että mitä nämä verkkosäännöt on. Useimmat kyllä tuntee ne, mutta aina sieltä varmaan jotain uusia aspekteja löytyy. Ja sitten yritän vastata kysymykseen, että pitäisikö minun ottaa ne vakavasti. Aion myös lyhyesti esitellä, minkälaisia ajatuksia on tässä puhtaan energian
explain briefly the ideas included in the clean energy package, and I will give you an overview of the future topics to be tackled at the European level. Is, for example, what kind of network codes can be foreseen. Network codes are a relatively old idea. As early as in 1996, the then Electricity Directive somehow recognized the existence of network codes. But the things speeded up about 10 years ago when we started speaking about target models. These represent a process which has been led by the regulatory authorities, and surprisingly enough, they have been able to involve the entire sector. So in the middle, you have the day-ahead market, if I understood Joka's terminology correctly. This is the level in which the European electricity markets are coupled. And in addition to that, we have the intraday market, in which we have a second level of integration where we are also aiming at a European market. Also in the target model for 2019, we have flow-based capacity allocation. The allocation of transmission capacity through auctions, and also balancing has been developed as the network codes have been making progress. But to actually accomplish such a target model has given a foundation for establishing network codes. And as things were being considered, we ended up with 3 categories of network codes. First of all, the market and trading codes and guidelines, the yellow, blue, and green in the middle. Then the connection codes and guidelines on the left in this picture, and they have a long-term impact. In other words, when you make investments, your units must have certain features. And then we have the balancing codes and system operation codes and guidelines. So this division has brought us forward. It is surprising that for the derivatives market, no one ever proposed any network codes. It was considered that the derivatives market is functioning well enough. But we do know that they are covered by the financing rules, and they may be even more regulated than all the other areas in this picture. In the EU, nothing tends to happen very quickly. Therefore, it took quite a long time to get these network codes completed, between 5 and 6 years. And this picture does not even include the fact that for the couple of first network codes, they started early. We started preparing them before the process was officially launched. All of these network codes are now in force, and there are almost 500 pages of them, so quite a lot. But considering the importance of the matter, it is not a terribly large amount. Whether there are too many pages, in other words, that it's too detailed, or whether there are too few pages, we will find out first when these codes are being implemented. We will then see whether we have too many details or whether important principles are missing. I will then pick up just a few network codes and respond to the question in my title or in my headline, whether these network codes have any impact on the Nordic market. There is usually resistance to change. Everyone would like to be in a position where they would not have to change anything, even though there are new rules. But this is, of course, not possible even in the Nordic countries, especially even though the Nordic model has been pioneering model for others. But I would also like to consider better approaches than not wanting to change anything. One thing that is included in all network or many network codes is the decision-making rules. We have European, regional, and national approvals. For example, as TSOs jointly propose something, depending on how large an area it covers or whether it is a pan-European rule, you either apply unanimity or a qualified majority. And the Nordic Nordic area has been defined in such a way that unanimity is required. For the national regulatory authorities, it is slightly different. According to the system, each NRA makes a decision separately, and if one of them is not willing to make a decision or is opposed to something, then the decision-making will be transferred to the ACER, in other words, the European Energy Agency. This is, in fact, a rather efficient model, because in this way, decisions are cannot be pending forever. There will always be a competent authority to take the decision. And if the national regulatory authority cannot make a proposal, the matter will be transferred to ACER, and the Commission will then have to decide what to do next. And obviously, for us in the Commission, it may be somewhat problematic that things turn up on our desks. In capacity calculation, for the most part, it is flow-based that is preferred. And I have been happy to see that there has been some willingness to change. So it seems that even you are going to adopt flow-based capacity calculation. Anyone interested in mathematics might think that it would always be a better way to calculate capacity than to stick to bilateral approach. The day-ahead market coupling, and for that, the rules require that exchanges must compete with one another. It was the competition authorities that were driving this rather actively, and it has been recorded in several pieces of legislation, and it seems that this is going to happen. There will be competition between exchanges, but it will not happen very quickly in order for them to be able to compete. It will take some rearranging, and it hasn't been happening very quickly. But from the point of view of the market, what would be better than to have several opportunities, several possibilities available? If one exchange does not respond to your request, then you can turn to another or a third one. As far as the intraday market or the intraday service platform, I think it would be possible to write a novel about this project. It has been a long and winding road, and now it is expected that it might start functioning in June, and there is no beer bottle large enough to celebrate that, because it will be a real milestone in this process. As far as the balancing rules, balancing code is concerned, it originally the balancing rules were largely based on the Nordic model, but as these rules have been fine-tuned, the thinking has developed quite a lot. There are also common platforms. One of them is called Mari, and the other one is called Picasso. Vesa perhaps knows more about this than I do. And the famous imbalance settlement period of 15 minutes is clearly included in there. There has been quite a lot of resistance in Finland to this 15 minutes, but I hope that you have already come over that and found ways to implement that. Lengthy transition periods have been promised, even though discussion is still ongoing regarding the energy package. Somehow it seems that if the whole rest of Europe is going for 15 minutes, things will turn rather lonely for Finland. If you are different, it will be important for the Danes, I could imagine, and for many other countries as well. The single price principle. When I was preparing this presentation, I realized that I don't really know myself what the single price principle is all about, so perhaps Vesa could explain it so that we all understand. If you do that, I will give you a prize. Joka mentioned there are different kinds of philosophies. The Nordic philosophy, to a large extent, has been to establish a transparent market where market operators can respond to signals. So if there is a shortage of electricity, the market operators themselves can add to it, or if there is too much, they can remove electricity from the balance. In Central Europe, the starting point is rather different in many countries. They are starting, or their philosophy is a centralized model where they avoid transparency because operators might take advantage of it against the centralized operator, and everything is checked in advance so that the centralized operator has all the resources under their management. As Joka said, it's difficult to say which is the better way, but of these different philosophies, the open model has been receiving more support in the Nordics. The day-ahead market coupling has progressed quite far already, not completed though yet. There are brown and grey areas in the map too, but I would like to claim that without these networks it would be a very difficult task. Now at least we have binding legislation that we can use to bring even the last countries to join. The coupling of markets has had a clear impact on, for example, a large share of physical energy is now going through the day-ahead market. In the Nordics, the percentage has traditionally been very high, but I would like to claim that the market model has supported the operations of the exchanges when we have selected the market model that we have. In some countries, it is in practice compulsory to sell electricity through the exchange. The smaller percentages belong to countries where they have one large operator having a dominant position in the market. Such countries include, for example, Belgium and France. But the system is still functioning. Then more examples. I will take up the system operation codes and guidelines. I would like to say that the philosophy largely came from Central Europe, but I'm prepared to change my mind if you have good arguments to the contrary. Those who have been writing about this, writing these rules in NSOE seem to be speaking German to one another. The European grid model, or the common grid model, we have in the market side we have such a grid model, and in the system operation side we also have such a common grid model. This alone is already quite an achievement. If I remember correctly, the Nordic countries used to have a common grid model of a kind, but now that all Europe has been joined into one model, that is a real achievement. But the regional security coordinators have given rise to a lot of discussion, and this is perhaps something that is still under discussion in the new directive process. There were two regional two of these, and it was considered rather good idea, but somewhere the TSOs had enough and they started resisting it. And now we are trying to deal with this resistance, and we'll see where it brings us. I have thought that to some extent we're wasting experts' time, but if the final result is good, then perhaps it has been a good investment. And in the Nordic countries, we already have such an authority, and if I remember correctly, it is located in Copenhagen. Then about the governance model. We already have the first example of how the network code has been working. Norway and Sweden presented a robust proposal in terms of how the balancing should be organized, and not everyone agreed. The way we thought about it was that, first of all, we were surprised and astonished. We had imagined that Nordic operators are all friends and would find it easy to agree on anything, but we saw that this was not the case. Some operators had a very firm opinion and others had a different opinion. And when we had recovered from our surprise, we tried to exert some pressure. We made some phone calls, we read the network codes, and we saw that a unanimous decision would be needed, and we kept repeating this until everyone understood that things would not go further before they had a unanimous decision. We then read a press release that the matter had been solved, and we were hugely relieved that things had actually been brought to a conclusion. And we hope that this example will lead us forward, both in the Nordics and in the rest of the world. We still had one means that we could resort to. If things go really poorly, we invite everyone to our manager's office, and the manager will then use some German diplomacy to sort things out. Here's an artistic view of the regional operations centers, and this is a slightly outdated picture, but we saw that there was a kind of conflict, and it seemed to be a step over the fence to the wrong side. Very briefly about the clean energy package. These are the elements included. All the relevant electricity-related legislation, directives, and other rules, and the proposals for changes. This is the picture of the whole package. Perhaps some observations about this picture so that you can then study it in peace. First of all, number one is the climate targets. Secondly, the belief in the markets. And thirdly, the incrementality. In other words, we do not mean to throw away all the work that we have done previously. Instead, we want to add something. And flexibility in the middle is very important, as well as to bring in end consumers. This means that TSOs too must be humble enough to do that, to learn to listen to the opinions of the end consumers, so that they can also integrate this into their balancing patterns. The focus must be on the end customer. I already mentioned that. Demand response. This has progressed rather far in Finland already, but we'll see how far exactly. The basic setting seems to be relatively good. The so-called aggregators have been indicated in green. So it seems that progress is possible. And almost lastly, Joka already mentioned that, for example, the relationships between DSOs and TSOs may change, and data management is something that must be that perhaps must be organized in a different way. To a large extent, it seems to be a matter of who has the responsibility or the right to manage the data. The one who has the right to manage the data has quite a lot of power, apparently. The second dimension is that various service providers have different relationships to the end consumer, not necessarily through smart metering, but also through other means. And this connection seems to be receiving more attention. I'm not saying that smart meters should be thrown away, but you should give some consideration to how smart and how complicated and expensive they should be. Tariffs will be reformed. I've been horrified to see that capacity tariffs are the only way, the only method applied these days. It's a very cold method to see to it that you get your money out of the customer. You could devise some other methods to motivate the end consumer to behave the way we would like them to behave. And finally, a list of things that someone might want to draft network codes on. I'm not taking any responsibility for this list, but in any case, before even the first one of these gets into the form of a network code, I will have been retired for a long time already. Local markets that also concern distribution networks, they are very interesting in this respect. And digitalization, it is obvious that digitalization will change things. We are thinking a lot about what digitalization is all about, and it seems that the opportunities are so huge that no one has really had time to consider how network codes could be used to tackle those opportunities. But we will be happy to receive any tips of good methods. Sector coupling is something that is also interesting. In Finland, electricity and heat are close to one another. In the rest of the world, the aim is to save gas companies, which as such is a good target. Unfortunately, the mushrooms are all different, not similar. And the digitalization circle or pie, it's like cutting an elephant into pieces. And here's a summary. So I think it is true that the Nordic model, the Nordic market, has been a model in many respects, not only as far as transmission capacity and auctions are concerned. Some network codes originated more from Central Europe, but now it seems that we are probably going to be more integrated towards the final consumer, which will bring completely new challenges. But we still have a lot of implementing to do in the old network codes. And my top boss says it's fundamental. So it's really very important that to implement the current codes. And it may be that there will be new network codes in the future, so I will be happy to receive any suggestions. Thank you.